Welcome to Mid-Level Adventurers, a podcast where non-experts talk about the things they love. I'm Jarrod Jehoda, and with me for this first series is my co-host, Matt Morris.
Hello everyone, it's Matt Morris.
Dungeons & Dragons is a fantasy role-playing game where the players create and build their own characters. And while we have touched upon how to build a character, the heritage options you may choose from, and some of the feats you can opt for, in this episode we will discuss class options. But what does that mean? What class options exist? Well, here today we are going to go into some of our favorites. The big question is, what are class options? What does that mean? There is a certain number of class options that are official Wizards of the Coast content. Those are, in alphabetical order, Artificer, Barbarian, Bard, Cleric, Druid, Fighter, Monk, Paladin, Ranger, Rogue, Sorcerer, Warlock, Wizard. That's a lot of words I just threw out there, but maybe we can go through and help some people out and kind of break down what each of those classes are. Let's start at the top with an Artificer. Artificers, their primary stat ability is Intelligence. They are a caster support class. They're like a tech wizard. They create magical objects that they can use on the battlefield for a variety of purposes. I would say there are two class abilities that I think are the key things is their magical tinkering ability, which lets them use their tinkerer's tools or any other artisan tools that they have to touch a tiny little non-magical object and give it magical properties.
Yeah, I think a cool little way to think of Artificer is like a wizard in a steampunk world.
Very true.
That doesn't mean they only have to exist there, of course. They can be in your campaign.
Yes, it is the only class that is not in the PHB, the Player's Handbook. It is from the Eberron source material. The next thing I think that is most interesting about the Artificer is they get the ability to infuse items. This gives them the ability to imbue mundane items with magical properties. They can only do it a certain number of times, so they can't just run around creating magic objects and selling them or dropping them. They only last until they do a new one. But if they die, it vanishes after a number of days equal to their intelligence modifier. Or if you learn a new infusion, it goes away, because you can only learn so many at a time.
This one's a new one to me, but it's quite fun to watch Amber, who plays Greek in our newly forged campaign, is playing a Goblin Artificer. And it's been quite useful member of the party. It's been quite fun to watch them and their abilities as they level up.
Oh yeah, they are very useful and they're fun. And honestly, I have never DM'd a party with an Artificer before, so I'm learning a lot about the class too.
Yeah, seems like a lot of fun.
Second on the list is the Barbarian. Big, strong, hulking brutes, frontline battle ragers, primary stat, strength. Class ability, Rage.
Yes.
Gotta love Rage.
It's great. If you're looking to make a new character and you're like a little overwhelmed with the plethora of options that some of the other classes get, you can't go wrong with a Barbarian and Rage.
It's true. I think a Barbarian is actually a really great first character you've ever made kind of deal.
Yeah.
Because the Rage alone gives you advantage on strength checks and strength saving throws. When you make a melee weapon attack while you're raging, you get a bonus to the damage roll that increases as you level up in Barbarian. And you also gain a resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage, which means you're essentially taking half damage from arrows, swords, whatever.
Which is incredible. I would like to point out I'm playing a Barbarian in a Pathfinder campaign. Haven't played it in 5e, but we have someone in our newly forged party that is.
One thing to note, if you are able to cast spells and are also a Barbarian, you cannot maintain concentration on a spell while you're raging.
That is a good point.
The other thing that I think Barbarians have that is really, really great is unarmored defense.
Yes.
Normally, in a lot of classes, you get proficiency with some sort of armor. Barbarians do gain a light armor and medium armor proficiency. But what's cool about them is if they are not wearing armor, they not only get to add their dexterity modifier to their armor class, they also get to add their constitution.
Which is huge.
Yeah, and Barbarians usually get a massive constitution because they need so many hit points. And they are the highest hit die of all the classes. They have a D12.
Yeah, that makes them, just what they are. They're excellent frontline fighters, and now you're not having to worry about keeping up with armor.
Right. That's why the combination of unarmored defense with rage is so good. Because when you are raging, you're taking half damage on piercing, slashing, and bludgeoning. So that on top of a high AC is a really great thing to have.
Keeps you in the fight longer, which is very important.
And usually when you add your constitution modifier and your dex modifier together, you end up with an equal or better AC than you would if you were wearing armor anyway.
Yeah, good point.
If you are a barbarian, and let's say you have a +3 in your strength, you have a +2 in your con, and you have a +2 in your your dexterity, you're going to have a 14 armor class based on the +2 modifier of your dexterity and the +2 modifier of your constitution. So you already have a 14 AC. That is the same as if you were wearing leather armor.
Yeah, just pretty awesome.
Third up is our bards. Bards are those witty, charming diplomats, delvers of lore, art, tellers of stories, arcane support casters. They're usually like the face of the party, and there's this long-running joke that bards attempt to sleep with whatever monster or creature, and that's how they attempt to overcome any obstacles.
Doesn't mean you have to play it that way, of course, but it could be fun if you want to.
So bards get spell casting. It's based off their charisma stat, which is usually their highest stat. Again, they are charming, witty, they're the face of the party. But really, what I think the best thing that bards get is bardic inspiration. These are extra die a bard can use on their bonus action to give to another creature other than themselves, and the bardic inspiration can be added to any ability check, attack roll, or saving throw.
Ah, yes.
And it lasts for 10 minutes of game time.
Right, which is a long time.
More than enough to cover any combat you could ever play.
Yeah, it's important to note it's a great support class, and that's not to say that you can't be powerful in your own right, but you're going to have skills that are both useful out of combat and useful in combat to support your other party members and, make them better at what they do.
Yeah, absolutely. You also get to be a jack of all trades, which means you get to add half your proficiency bonus, rounded down, to any ability check you make that you're not proficient in.
And that's really cool.
Yeah. And bards are the only class that get to learn spells from other classes.
Oh, yeah, you're right. And that's pretty cool. That probably goes into that jack of all trade thing, right? It just carries over into their magic leanings.
Yeah. And we'll come right off of bard and go into cleric. Clerics are the holy priests. They're the devotees to divine beings or just divine concepts. The big things with clerics are, of course, that they are generally tied to deities, but they don't have to be, which I think is an important distinction.
Yes, very true.
But most of the time they are followers of a faith. As such, they are granted spells from their deity, so they have spellcasting. And wisdom is their spellcasting ability. But wisdom does not have to be their highest stat. It's generally considered that it's a good idea because then all their spells get boosts to their spell attack bonus and to their saving throw DCs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a lot of these extra spells that we mentioned with Bard happen in Cleric from their divine domain. Clerics select their domain, and then they get those domain spells, which could be from any class, but they are specific spells that the Cleric's domain offers them. So they don't get to choose what those are, unlike the Bard. The Bard can choose whatever they want.
Right.
The Cleric only gets certain ones that are on a list for that domain. The second thing that Clerics get that is amazing is Channel Divinity.
Yes.
Channel Divinity gets you a couple of different options, and one of them is always Turn Undead.
Mm-hmm.
And then one comes from your domain, and they're varied and different depending on which domain you choose.
Yeah, the domains are pretty varied, but that is the through line usually. One thing to note about the Cleric, in a lot of people's mind, the Cleric is a healer, but that's not necessarily the case, right? I think the healer could be viewed as another support class that offers buffs and things like that to the party, which could include healing. But you could, shape that Cleric in several ways. You can really focus on that, or you can focus on damage or other things. Something to consider.
Yeah, if you look at the example of Critical Role, Taliesin Jaffe plays Caduceus Clay, who is definitely a healer Cleric. Meanwhile, Laura Bailey plays Jester, and she does not heal at all. She plays Jester as someone who tricks enemies, manipulates the battlefield, and attacks if she has to. But she's much more of a mind warper than a healer. So that's just an example that you don't have to play a healer to be a Cleric. Next up on the list is the Druid, which is another wisdom-based class.
Mm-hmm. It's similar-ish to a Cleric, right? In that it has magic abilities come from divine nature, but not a deity necessarily, right?
Correct. Druids are more in touch with the natural order of things, and they are more concerned with that. They believe in nature, live and let live, or survival of the fittest. They are in touch with the natural order of things and not the celestial. So their source of divinity is much different than a Cleric's. I think the most standout thing that Druids get is Wild Shape.
Mm-hmm.
The ability to transform into beasts of a certain toughness that improves as they go on. And the cool thing about that is, unlike the spell Polymorph, when a Druid uses Wild Shape, they retain their mental stats and just take on the physical attributes of a boar or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And they get all the hit points of that creature as long as they are in that creature form. But when the boar form goes to 0 hit points, the Druid reverts back to their true form and takes any excess damage in their true form.
Yes.
And they can only wild shape a certain number of times per short rest.
Right, that increases as you level up. It is a nice way to have some extra hit points, if nothing else, but also to explore some really cool options in the animal world. They don't always have to be combat related. It's very situational, of course, but there may be times where you need to do a scouting mission and you want to be a rat to sneak into a building or something.
And there's no time limit on wild shape either.
Right, as long as you stay alive, you can stay whatever form you choose.
Yep. At higher levels in your wild shape, you can even cast spells.
Yes.
Druids also gain an ability where they only age 1 year for every 10 that they spend alive.
Just kind of cool.
Yeah, so archdruids can live hundreds of years even if they're not an elf, even as a human.
I was about to say, regardless of the species you choose.
Next on the list, we have fighters, the classic armored warriors, masters of martial combat. They are the frontline defensive stalwart champions. Fighters are kind of interesting because they can make one of two stats their primary stat, depending on what kind of a fighter they want to be. If they're going to be a melee fighter, sword, axe, spear, whatever, they can be a strength-based fighter. But if they want to be a ranged fighter, bow and arrow, crossbow, anything like that, they can be a dexterity-based fighter. And this is the first class in our list that really gives you that option.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, the class abilities that they get that I think are the strongest are they get Action Surge, and they get more extra attacks than any other class.
Mm-hmm.
So Action Surge lets a fighter take another action during their turn, which means they can take another attack action, so they can attack more often. And because of their extra attack features, at level 20, a fighter can have up to 4 attacks as an attack action, which means that if they use their Action Surge after taking their attack action to make 4 attacks, they can make another 4 attacks for a total of 8 attacks in one round.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy, actually.
This is kind of to balance fighters with higher one-action damage-dealing classes like spellcasters or paladins.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a really good balance, and I really think it works out well. It's one of the reasons I love fighters.
Yeah, they're a great class. They're a great class for starting players, too. When you talk about the, melee specialist of the game, barbarians have their rage, fighters have that action surge, and they may not be doing as much damage per hit, per se, as a barbarian, but those extra attacks can really change things up. And the fact that they've got a little added versatility, in how you shape your character at the beginning, whether you do strength or dex-based, it's pretty cool.
After the fighter, we have the monk. Monks, as you might imagine, unarmored, unarmed, they're all about movement and defense. They can also be either strength or dexterity-based combatants. But wisdom is really where monks get their bread and butter, and that is because their wisdom determines their key points.
Mm-hmm. The only class that has key points.
Correct. Key points are what a monk uses to harness the energies of themselves. It's the representation of them channeling their own inner strengths in the game. You can spend these to do a variety of different things. You can expend key points as a bonus action, which allows you to do your flurry of blows. You can expend a key point to take patient defense, and you can spend one to use Step of the Wind. Monks are all about maneuvering on the battlefield. So essentially, key points allow you to turn what would normally be another action into a bonus action, which is really cool.
It is, yeah. It's a very unique class for that reason.
The other cool thing about monks is they get not only unarmored defense, except their unarmored defense comes from their wisdom modifier. Mm-hmm. They also get unarmored movement, which means as long as they are not wearing armor or wielding a shield, they can move at an increased speed. So they can really jump around the battlefield.
They're martial artists, really. That's the class feature that you get at first level. Gives you a mastery of combat styles. They use unarmed strikes. Or monk weapons. It's a very short list, but their strength is in their fist.
Right, and their fists eventually become magical, which is also cool.
It is very cool. And you can use dex instead of strength for the attack and damage rolls. So doubling down on dex not only makes you stronger, but also makes you better at maneuvering the battlefield.
And here's the thing about the martial arts ability. Normally, an unarmed strike just deals 1 point of damage to something if you hit them. With the martial arts ability, the monk, they start by being able to roll a d4 instead of just rolling 1 point of damage. But that die increases as they level. Mm-hmm. So it scales with you as your skill grows.
They, just on their own, are a very unique class in a lot of ways.
Following up the monk, we get the paladin. Paladins are these divine holy warriors. Paladins want to have a high strength because they are going to be melee combatants. They also have the ability to gain spells, so charisma is usually also pretty high up for them. Mm-hmm. Paladins get divine sense, which allows them to detect creatures not of the material realm. They can figure out if there is a celestial fiend or undead within 60 feet of them, as long as it's not behind total cover.
You might find yourself trying to decide between a cleric and a paladin, for instance. I think maybe a distinction would be, just like in a basic sense, is the paladin is going to be more of a melee combatant, whereas the cleric would be more of a spellcaster.
Correct. The other thing that paladins get, which is amazing, they get Divine Smite, which is the ability to turn their spell slots into extra damage on melee attacks.
Yes, it's very cool.
Which means that they use up the spell slot, they can't cast a spell, but they get to take that spell slot and add a bunch of extra damage when they hit, because they can choose to do it after they have hit something successfully.
It can be a really clutch move if you really just need to finish off the boss character of your encounter, whatever that might be.
Next up, we have Rangers. Nature's guardians. Whereas the druids kind of cultivate nature, rangers actively defend it. Rangers hunt, they trap, and they are a great support class. They're kind of a mix of melee and magic. The typical ranger is the archer.
It's not the only way to play it, of course.
But rangers are also either a strength or dex-based class, depending on which way you want to go. They're two things that I think are really good. Favorite enemy, which you select at a certain level, and you can select more as you level up. The idea being that you have chosen these creatures for some reason, some narrative reason, to be something that you despise, that you hate, that you hunt. And they can be aberrations, beasts, celestials. They can even be humanoids. In which case, if it is humanoids, you narrow it down to be like gnolls, goblins, whatever.
Yeah, they're hunters, in a lot of flavor backstory scenarios. It's a way to look at it. What you're hunting varies.
And then they get Natural Explorer, which essentially gives them a favorite terrain, which allows them to double their proficiency bonus if they are in that environment when they are making either wisdom or intelligence checks relating to that environment. So survival or nature checks or whatever. Also, difficult terrain doesn't slow a group's travel if it's your favorite environment. Your group can't become lost unless there's magic involved. You remain ever alert to danger. You can move stealthily at a normal pace, or at least the ranger can. You find more food than normal. And if you're tracking something through your favorite terrain, you learn more about them, the exact numbers, how big they are, and how long they passed through. And you can choose more favorite terrains as you level. The idea being you have explored the world more. You have learned more about these different environs.
If you're just looking at the ranger on paper and you're trying to think about like how they are in combat, for instance, some of these extra features may seem less on the forefront, but it's important to point out that a lot of these are very helpful to the entire party and for travel. And depending on your campaign, you're probably going to be doing a lot of travel, and you're probably going to be spending a lot of time outside. And not only that, I've seen some rangers do some serious damage in combat.
Next up is our rogues. Rogues are your stealthy thieves, your assassins, your cunning warriors and schemers. Dexterity-based class, rogues get probably one of the best abilities in the game. Rogues get sneak attack. Sneak attack are extra damage dice that rogues get to do if circumstances allow. They are d6s, but the number of them increases as they go. High enough rogues can do up to 10 d6 extra points of damage on a successful attack. The cool thing about sneak attack is it happens once per turn, which means if anyone gives a rogue an opportunity attack or another creature is able to command the rogue to attack again, they could potentially get sneak attack on a turn that is not their own, because it is not per round, it is per turn. The next couple of things that they get that I think are really great are uncanny dodge, which allows them to have any attack that would damage them as long as they can see the incoming attack. They also get evasion, which means that if they are subjected to something that causes them to make a dexterity saving throw for half damage and they succeed, then they take no damage instead, and they take only half damage if they fail. Rogues want a high dexterity and they can't wear heavy armor, so being able to avoid damage in that way is very, very key for a rogue in combat.
Yes, as they tend to be a little squishy.
They do.
But they also rely on their dexterity and their cunning, usually to avoid direct combat, or sneak past it, avoid it, or, find a way to get an advantage.
Yep. Next up, we have the Sorcerer. Arcane spellcasters imbued with a natural connection to magic. It is something that they are inherently born with. They have an ability to twist and shape magic in kind of exciting ways. Beyond just getting the ability for spellcasting, which uses their charisma bonus, so that should be your highest stat if you're a sorcerer. They get Font of Magic, which is represented in the form of sorcery points. They can use these sorcery points for a variety of options that give their spellcasting more versatility. You can check details for that either in the player's handbook or on D&D Beyond. The other thing that sorcerers get that is really cool is their meta magic abilities, which they get to choose a couple of, and they can choose a couple more as they level. Those offer even more versatility in your spellcasting. You can do things like extend your spell to increase something's duration. You can heighten your spell.
I can't add a whole lot to the spellcasting because that's the least of my knowledge. But yeah, they are a cool class. If I was to do a spellcasting first round, I would probably do Sorcerer.
Sorcerers are fun because they are not constrained to certain restrictions that a wizard or a warlock are.
Right.
Which, speaking of a warlock, warlocks are arcane casters who've made a deal with some other entity for their power. And as such, the cool thing they get are patrons and pact magic. They are the only spellcasting class that doesn't actually get spellcasting as a class ability. They get pact magic.
Right.
So the way that they cast spells is very different from every other class. They have much fewer spell slots. As a result of this, they also get something that no other class gets: Eldritch Invocations.
Mm-hmm.
Now, these invocations are like magical abilities that they can just do at will. For example, one of them allows you to cast Mage Armor on yourself at will without expending a spell slot. One of them grants you the ability to see through magical darkness permanently. One lets you see through walls, and you pick them as you level up. You gain more and more of these abilities as you go. The idea being your patron is providing you more and more magic as you get stronger.
It's a really cool and pretty unique class. And it's also maybe worth noting that, oddly enough, while most of the spellcasters are very squishy, the Warlock is not as squishy as the Sorcerer and the Wizard.
It's true. There is even a version of Warlock that is designed to be a fighter type.
Yeah, I don't know if that's like compensation for getting less spell slots or what it is, but there's also a lot of like really interesting options in terms of like flavor and backstory for the Warlock.
And unlike the Sorcerer and the Wizard, Warlocks can wear light armor.
Ah, right. If you needed to be a little more close to combat as a spellcaster, maybe that's the choice to make.
Finally, last but certainly not least, we get your classic wizard. The studious arcane caster, master of magic, curators of spells, seeker of relics. I mean, what's there to say about a wizard? They get spellcasting. They have the largest spell class list in the game.
Mm-hmm.
They can pretty much learn just about any spell, I think.
I think so, yeah.
And they do it by studying. They have to expend money and time in order to copy and write spells into their books. It takes 2 hours and costs 50 gold per spell level. The other cool thing that they get is they get Arcane Recovery, and they're the only spell casting class to get Arcane Recovery. During a short rest, they can choose expended spell slots to recover. They can do this once per day because wizards are all about their magic and their spells. So being able to get them back during a short rest is clutch, especially among classes that do not regain spell slots until a long rest is completed.
It is very clutch. This can be huge. If you've ever played it or will play a spellcasting class, you'll quickly find how precious spell slots are.
And wizards are one of the few arcane classes that can actually learn way more spells than they can cast. All they need to do is they need to, in the morning, prepare which spells they will know that day.
Mm-hmm.
And they can change it up every morning.
Interesting to note is their primary ability is intelligence, and that is only shared with the Artificer.
Correct. Well, that was a long segment.
It was. Good luck editing that.
One fun little feature we have here on Mid-Level Adventures is our Tavern Corner, where we go and talk about what we are imbibing this evening. So, Matt, what are you imbibing tonight?
Well, tonight I'm returning to, I think, something that I've tried before. So I am back in Georgia. I'll spare you the life story reason for that, but I'm revisiting a brewery that I've tried before, Pretoria Fields Collective. And I just learned some things about this because I read it on the can. Apparently they try to grow a lot of the ingredients for the beer locally and organically, which I find very cool.
Yeah.
Tonight I'm trying their Walker's Station Stout.
Ah.
Yeah, I love having a dark beer at the end of the day. It's a very accessible stout, not overly heavy, not too crazy high in the alcohol content. It's got all the right notes: toffee, coffee, chocolate, caramel, all those are there. So yeah, they're from Albany, Georgia, so shout out to Albany. Very enjoyable. Glad I got a 6-pack.
Nice.
How about you? What are you having tonight?
Tonight I'm drinking the Kelso Pilsner.
Kelso. I'm trying to recognize the can earlier.
Yeah, the Kelso Pilsner by the Kelso Beer Company in the Bronx in New York here.
Yeah.
It is a Bavarian Pilsner style. It's good. I don't know what more to say about it.
It's a Pilsner.
I don't know anything about them.
I really don't either.
I've been looking at this beer for weeks in the store, and I was finally like, I'm going to try it because it was either this or revisit a brewery that I've already talked about. So I wanted to try something a little different. We know that I am a lighter beer sort of person, Pilsners, whatever. This one's really good. It's got kind of a sweet sourness to it. On the first pull, there's a little bit of a spice aroma, but it's a nice clean finish. It doesn't suck your inside of your cheeks in when you're done with it like some Pilsners can do.
Yeah, we've talked before about sort of the quote-unquote Americanized version of Pilsners, and you've had way more experience with Pilsners and with true European Pilsners too. How does this rank? Is it, true to its origins?
I would say that the added layers to it definitely make it an Americanized Pilsner. It's not as crisp as an European Pilsner would probably be, but that said, it finishes clean and dry, so it's enjoyable. It's not bad at all. It's just a different style of Pilsner.
Nice representation from the Bronx as well. They've got a few breweries, but I know of them less, as Brooklyn sort of dominates the brewery scene now in the boroughs.
Right.
Well, cheers.
Cheers. And that is what we are imbibing tonight. Once you have selected your class, you are going to be a fighter, a wizard, whatever. At certain points, depending on the class, you get to choose your subclass. But what is a subclass? What is the point of a subclass? So Matt, here's what I think. Subclasses are how a character begins to be specialized.
Yes.
In the player's handbook, each class has at least 3 subclass options, and they're given different names. Paladins have oaths that they follow, rogues have archetypes, druids have circles, etc., etc., etc. It's just what the subclass is called for that class. They allow you to figure out how to play the character the way you want to play it, what kind of character you want to play. If you're a rogue and you want to be really sneaky and deal massive damage, maybe you choose the assassin archetype, whatever it might be.
I think it definitely creates another level of variety and versatility, and you may even find that some of them sort of overlap into other classes in some ways, right? You may have a ranger, for instance, that shares some similarities with a rogue, and it could be a way of like filling a party out if you don't have some of these other classes in your party. It could just be the way you want to play.
Yeah. Subclasses allow you to tweak your character in the direction you want. Now, once you've chosen a subclass, you cannot pick a new one. Like, you don't get to pick a new one if you end up not caring for it that much.
Sadly.
And there are so many subclass options that there's no way we could talk about them all.
Oh gosh, no. If we're including Unearthed Arcana, the list is staggering.
And apparently there's another, I think, 22 coming in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything.
Oh my gosh.
There are many resources you can use. D&D Beyond, there's Google. You can find this information if you're really interested in learning what all they are. So instead, let us focus on specific favorite subclasses that we have for our favorite class. So what is your favorite class, and what is the subclass that you love the most about it?
I don't know if it's a favorite class, but easily I could pick Druid with the favorite subclass of Circle of the Moon, because it just doubles down on the Druid's ability to wild shape. Gives you access to a higher CR rating creature earlier. If you're going to play a Druid, to me, that's like Circle of the Moon. It's just the way to play a Druid. Obviously, that's not the only way. So that's my quick, just like, don't even have to think about it. How about you?
For me, Battlemaster for Fighter.
Yeah.
That's my choice. And the real reason is because of the different maneuvers you get to use. You get these superiority die that you can expend to use a maneuver. These maneuvers are all kinds of different things that can affect combat in your favor. For example, you can make it something trip and fall prone. You can cause a creature to drop their weapon, and so they're now disarmed.
Mm-hmm. You can cause other party members to attack.
There's tons of things you can do. You can also gain insight by observing your foes. So if you spend a minute observing a creature, you can learn something about them. You can learn their hit points compared to yours, their armor class compared to yours, their strength score compared to yours, all kinds of things that are very useful to know. And the cool thing is you regain superiority dice on a short rest. So unlike other classes who only get stuff back on a long rest, a fighter gets all their stuff back on a short rest.
Mm-hmm.
At even higher levels, if a fighter begins a round without a superiority die, then they can regain a superiority die. And the superiority die increases as you level.
Yeah, I think it's great. Can confirm, have played it. It is also a great subclass. There are some complaints out there about the sort of standard champion subclass of fighter, so if you think it's too basic to whatever, Battlemaster.
So being that those are our favorite subclasses for our preferred class, favorite class, whatever, the kind of flavors that exist are just far-reaching. As we've said, there's too many to talk about. But what are a couple flavors of a class that you really like to see or that you would like to see come out?
Why don't you go first on this one?
I'm a creative guy. I like things that have a theme.
Mm-hmm.
So I really like when a subclass really dives into a theme. For example, with your Warlock, depending on the patron that you select, it's heavily themed in that direction. So with Warlocks, if you select an Archfiend as your patron, you can flavor your character using that. I think using subclasses as a way to help round out your character and help you to define what they look like, how they act, what their views on certain things are is a really cool thing. And I think subclasses that pay attention to themes do it really well. So that's what I really look for a flavor. I look for a really cool theme, a really interesting theme.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think there are a lot of subclasses that lend themselves to that very well. The classes that have sort of divine inspiration, depending on what that deity is, that could be themed much like the Warlock you mentioned. But yeah, I agree. I think leaning into themes is really great, and maybe that can help guide you into what direction. If you have a strong theme or backstory in mind, maybe that helps guide you into the direction of a subclass to pick.
Yeah. So we have mentioned UA, Unearthed Arcana, in this conversation so far. But what is that and how does it relate to subclasses? How does that relate to class options?
Well, Unearthed Arcana is Wizards' official playtest material. Honestly, I haven't dealt with it a lot myself. I have stuck with things that are not playtest when making characters. But Jarrod, tell us a little bit more about what that means. What does it mean to be playtest material?
So Unearthed Arcana is the test field for Dungeons & Dragons. Wizards of the Coast puts new subclasses out on there, new spells out on there, because they want people to try it in their game and then give them feedback. They usually do one a month and let people play with them, and then they ask them to fill out a survey and respond with, what do you like? Is there anything you would change about this? Would you tweak it? Once they get feedback from playtesters in the community, they can then take and rework and then maybe re-release later, or if it ended up being really well, then they can take it and put it in a source book and release it sooner for official play. Now, DM's Guild, which we've talked about before, is a community-based website and a resource. If you're looking for something that's a little bit different or a little more unique, maybe not official, maybe a little unbalanced, or maybe you can work with your DM to tweak it, then DM's Guild has a variety of options. There's hundreds and hundreds of amazing content creators on that website for you to interact with. And a lot of the stuff on there is pay what you want. So you can pay a penny, you can pay nothing, you can pay $10. It's all up to you. Check it out. Just give it a browse. I highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun. So talking about DM's Guild, people often ask, oh, can I create my own subclass? Which you absolutely can.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, so if you could build your own subclass, what would it be for and what would you like it to be?
Oh, boy. I really don't know, actually. I honestly don't know if I could contribute anything that doesn't already exist in some way. Because there's so much. There's so much already subclass-wise. How about you, though? Have you already made something, surely?
Oh, yeah, I've made quite a few. I'm working on trying to come up with one good subclass for each class.
It's pretty awesome.
I really would like to get them play tested and get some feedback on them. One has been kind of used by a couple friends of mine, and they seem to like it at low levels, which is Cleaver, which is a fighter archetype.
Yeah.
That essentially lets the fighter cleave through enemies. It grants bonus movement depending on if they drop somebody. I've also created a couple of blood-themed subclasses, one for sorcerers as a sorcerer's origin called Arcane Blood, and one for the Barbarian called the Path of Blood.
Ah, very cool.
Which are fun and interesting, and if I ever get them sussed out, maybe I'll put them up on DM's Guild.
Yeah. What is just out of curiosity, what is the Path of Blood, for instance? What does that entail?
So the idea with the Path of Blood is that your blood kind of boils, and so it works with your rage abilities, and it gives you a bite attack that you can take as a bonus action. It kind of drives you wild, like you can't control the anger in your blood. It's based on the idea of you just see red.
Yeah.
So it's a very aggressive form of Barbarian.
Yeah, I haven't been inspired necessarily to create anything like new, but I have looked over a few in Pathfinder that I might try to incorporate in some way into 5e, just because I believe there are a few extra choices and extra steps in Pathfinder, so balancing would be an issue. But for instance, I'm playing a Barbarian Blood Rager, which is basically sort of a hybrid class. It's like a spellcasting Barbarian.
Yeah. So let's wrap up this episode of class options and subclasses. Whoo boy, what a biggin'.
It is a biggin'.
Yeah. I think we can safely say that subclasses are a lot of fun. They can help give you a starting point with your character. However, don't feel like you can't mix it up. Maybe you do choose the assassin subclass, but maybe you take a high charisma. So instead of sneaking around in shadows, you make yourself a very popular fake identity and use that to get close to your targets. And then you disappear with your stealth. There's tons of different options and different ways you can use the subclass to flavor your character and the abilities that you go with. Anything in the game, have fun with it.
Yeah, I would echo that exactly. The beauty of the subclasses is it branches out these base types that are sort of like, okay, we know what a fighter is. They do this, this, and this, but the subclasses give you extra options. So you're not limited to just generic choices that sort of, quote, define that class, right? And I like that some subclasses have some like crossover. The options are pretty interesting, and there's a lot to read over. Like Jarrod said, look for what kind of sounds the most fun to you. I don't think any one of them is better than the other.
Well, thank you all for coming along with us on this episode. Join us for next week's adventure as we talk about multi-classing. Remember to check out our friend and the composer of all the music used on Mid-Level Adventurers, John D. Ivey, on SoundCloud.com. Please follow us on Twitter and Instagram at MidLVLAdventure.
And please check out our website on Wix at midleveladventurer.wixsite.com, and feel free to email us at midleveladventurers@gmail.com. And hey, watch Jarrod and I on Newly Forged, Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern at twitch.tv/newlyforged.
And with that, I'm Jarrod Jehoda.
And I'm Matt Morris.
Until then, mind the traps and keep adventuring.